Welcome back, listeners, to the Sabbath at Midnight. And we'll be discussing once again the Conquistadors and some history on the giants, a little background on them. We covered in the first one basically the adventures of Pineda and others and their conquest of the Americas and Central America and other places around the world, and their push into the lands of the giants. But to get a better view on who the giants were, I want to go over some biblical stuff. And we'll start here. One only needs to do a cursory study of the Bible to verify the definite existence of giants throughout the biblical narrative. The earliest appearance of giants occurs just before the flood of Noah's documentation. Many of you can recall that, the flood of Noah. Considering the detail added by the Enoch in his accounting of pre-flood giants, we learn that the flood was caused on the earth to get rid of these giants, these hybrids, these spawned by devious angels, who were driven by cross-species lust, sexual lust. But for some unknown reason, some, if not many, of the giants survived that flood, or genetic mutation was present in the normal-sized survivors. So we see that many hybrid tribes, and we'll get into that in a bit. The Christian-centered belief accepts that only Noah and his kin survived the flood, but the ancient record and the anthropological and historical facts challenge this narrow view. There are hundreds of Noahs and Noah-like flood legends in the histories and legends of the most ancient peoples around the world. One that comes to mind is when I believe it was Homer and his writings. One of his descendants visited a priestess in Egypt, and they talked about there have been many floods that they just only knew of one, but there had been many disasters on the earth already. So, and furthermore, and how did African, Asian, Mesoamerican, and other great cultures of the world exist on a much grander scale than the Adamic related culture of the Bible, both before and after the Great Flood they record? Only more survivors could explain this, right? So, the recognition of Bible-related giants is high, even outside mainstream Christian influence. With the famous and oft-repeated encounter of David and the giant, Goliath. Some are aware of other accounts of giants. The king with the 16-foot bed, deeply buried in the biblical record. Several tribes or groups of giants are named. Many of these are mentioned in the verses we present on giants in the Bible. But it would take an exhaustive project to make an entire presentation of these giant tribes, and it would. And I know Gary Wayne's coming out with this new book, so I'm sure he'll touch on the giant tribes. I'm continuing. We always encourage our readers or people who read these type of things or study or research to do your own independent on all subjects found on giants. Do your own research. In the case anyone interested in these giant tribes you can do an internet search. You can put the word giants, and sometimes you'll yield something, but not always. But many of you out there don't know, and maybe some do. There are 36 tribes of giants mentioned in the Bible. The Amalekites are known to be the vampiric type. The Amorites, blonde, blue eyes. The Anakim, the long necks. The Ashterites, the Avims, the Avites, the Canaanites, the Cathorims, the Ikronites, the Imins, the Ishklanites, the Gazazites, the Gershites, the Gibeonites, the Gilbites, the Girgashites, the Gittites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Hurim, the Horites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, Kenzanites. It goes on and on and on. The Sidonians, the Zamzumins, the Zoomzumins. They're just the ones that buzz. So there's more than just the Anakim and the Amorites. And in all totality, there's 36 tribes of giants. What is Nephilim? We touched on that a little bit. The word Nephilim does not appear in the Bible, nor in the Hebrew pronunciation of any words translated in the Bible. But the word Nephil, pronounced Nephil, does in the first mention of giants in Genesis 6:4, and Numbers 13:33 when describing the giants of the promised land, Canaan. These giants were apparently the original giants spawned by the Grigori, the giant angels who mated with human females. Now, this is interesting here because a lot of these giant tribes are not mentioned in the Table of Nations, so that's why we know they're not human. They're not fully human, these tribes. And we'll name a few of the kings of the giants. Adozendek, king of Jerusalem. Agag, king of the Amalekites. Arba, Gog and Magog. Goliath, Hoam, king of Hebron. Horim, king of Gezer. Jabin, king of Hazar. Joab, king of Madon. Nimrod, Og of Bashan. Ogus, that's Og's father. The Perizzites. Shisha, Sion, king of the Amorites. Talmai, and it goes on and on. So it names the kings of the tribes. And when you look at Numbers 13:33, it says, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak. We come of the giants, and we were in our sights grasshoppers, as so were in their sights. Numbers 13:33. So, and we'll give a few more passages here. So God decides that the tribes of Israel should settle on the land called Canaan. And he ordered Moses to send his men to explore it. And they came back with a bad report. And that's in, he sent out the spies in Numbers 13, 13:1 and 17. And the men reported it was beautiful there. And the land was abundant, but the cities, there were great walled cities and strong people that were the sons of Anak living there. And they returned from searching the land after 40 days, and they told him and said, we came unto the land whither thou sentest, and surely it floweth with milk and honey. And this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled, and very great, and moreover, we saw the children of Anak. Numbers 13:25-28. So we're doing this backstory because we know that Joshua, Caleb, and Moses, they fought against these giant tribes. Moses all the way up until the time of the Promised Land when he was able to see upon the Promised Land and the Lord took him. So Moses wasn't able to fight inside the actual Promised Land, but he did on the fights before that. And you can do some research on that, and you can come to your own conclusion on that. So continuing, so they brought the evil report onto them, and that's when they ended up roaming the deserts. They call it the wilderness, until that generation passed away. And when you move forward through this, and you know that once Joshua fought them and Caleb, and then later was King David, a lot of these tribes got away. They ran. They came to the Americas. They went to different parts of the world. And that's when the Conquistadors and Native Americans and other tribes encountered the giants. So let's look at, let's turn to the Conquistadors now, briefly. Some of us, we studied in school the history and learned about the Conquistadors or the Conquistadores, especially Hernan Cortez and his battles with the conquering of the Aztecs. Our history books implied that the Aztecs were essentially the previous rulers of Mexico, dominating all other tribes and exacting tribute for them. They also gave us the impression the Aztecs were the original indigenous people of Central America. Actually, neither is true, believe it or not. The Aztecs were relative newcomers to Mexico when the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s. They had only been in Mexico probably about 300 years. And also, they never conquered all of central of the Mexican tribes. Fray Diego Duran moved to Mexico with his family in 1542. At the age of 5, he grew up among the Central Mexican Indians, later working as a missionary among them for 32 years. He's considered by most scholars to be an excellent authority on pre-Columbian history, language, and customs. He studied pre-Hispanic pictorial histories explained to him by Indians well trained in the ancient hieroglyphics and pictographs. Excuse me. And also interviewed many of the older Indians, very knowledgeable about the ancient traditions. These tribes, as many as the other Northern American tribes, carefully trained certain individuals to memorize the oral history, usually word for word, so they would not be embellished or distorted. So the result of all his time and work was a 78-chapter of Mexico. 78 history. He wrote a 78 chapters worth of it. And basically, it was from its origins up to the Spanish conquest. The history related to him and written in pictorial manuscripts says that around 900 AD, 6 tribes of people came to Mexico from a place near the present-day state of Florida, which they called Aztlan, because they had been the remnants of the survivors of the legend of the lost continent of Atlantis. Now, that's something that could be possible. I mean, there's a lot of... You go back to Homer, you go back to Timaeus and Critias, talks about Atlantis, the priestess, Solon, all these other writings about Atlantis. It's possible. Even the Bible mentions that. Ask your fathers of a former time, and they know nothing. So I think for me, in my opinion, I think there was an Atlantis. Let's continue. So going back to this, possibly the survivors of the lost continent of Atlantis, we may never know, but it wasn't until 300 years later, in the early 1200s, that a seventh and related tribe known as the Aztecs arrived in Central America. According to the history of these 7 tribes, including the Aztecs, when they arrived in Mexico, was already inhabited by 2 distinctly different groups of people. In the Western Mountains, named by the Spanish the Sierra Madre Occidental, were a people called Chichimecs or Chichimecas. In the east, in the areas of present-day Puebla and Cholula, were the Quasamine, which meant men of great stature. All of them were at least 7 to 8 foot tall. Now, we're talking about giants here. Their ratio is usually 2 to 1, which basically means that if these things are 8 foot tall, they're 4 foot wide. So it's not like I see an NBA star. He's 6'5", 6'6", and he's 2 feet wide, whatever. Tall and thin. Some of these basketball players are a little broader, but just to give perspective, these giants were built like probably like Shaq, but just a little bigger. But if you can imagine Shaq just a little bit bigger, he's 7 foot. You're talking 7, 8 foot here. These things are bigger, they're wider, and they're more agile. And the esoterics, they talk about how quick they were. And even Buffalo Bill relates a story of the Native Americans, how these giants were so fast they can run down a buffalo, grab it, and eat it while they're running. I mean, I don't know. What do you make of that? I mean, that's just wild. So continuing, when the newer tribes arrived, they set out to rid the land of the people already living there. They killed thousands, but many fled high into the Sierra, hiding themselves in isolated areas. The Huacal and the Core Indians are believed to be descendants of the Chichimecs. Not only were their lives saved, but their cultures have survived fairly intact because of their isolation from the newcomer tribes. And later, the Spanish, who also sent masses of troops, augmented it by their Indian allies in the mountains for the express purpose of eliminating them. So the Spanish they had allies, because these tribes, some of them didn't like one another. So the Quinanim refused to give up their land, their homeland, and they fought violently to defend it. But they were greatly outnumbered, especially when the tribes all allied against them. Many were slaughtered through trickery. Others flung themselves from cliffs and the precipice. Rather than to be conquered, they were harassed and pursued until most all were destroyed. It is believed some may have migrated to other parts of Mexico farther north. For example, the Seri, a giant tribe of Indians, were found by Coronado living on the island the Spanish named Tiburon and adjacent coast of Sonora on the Gulf of California. Coronado's men described the Seri as being so huge that the tallest of the Spaniards only came to their waist or lower chest. Yet farther north, in what is now the state of Arizona, Coronado encountered the Cocopa, a Yuman tribe. That's Y-U-M-A-N tribe. All were over 8 foot tall and incredibly strong. Coronado's historians noted that 6 of the Spaniards tried to carry a large log to the fire, were unable to move it. A Cocopa man lifted up easily onto his head and carried it to the fire. So it took one giant to lift his log, and these other men couldn't do it in a group. So it tells you how strong they were. Others obviously survived, as well as Bernardo de Sabugon, who arrived in Mexico in 1523 and was considered to be the foremost authority of his time on the pre-conquest Aztec culture, wrote of the giants of Quinamintin, and even asserted that they built both Teotihuacan and Chocola. Bernardo Diaz del Castillo, another Spanish historian who served in the army of Hernan Cortez during his conquest of Mexico, wrote about the Texicaltecs, who eventually became one of Cortez's most loyal allies. They related to Diaz that a race of huge people had once lived among their ancestors. They even brought the skeptical Diaz a femur, or thigh bone for one of the defunct giants. Diaz describes it as being very thick and the height of an ordinary sized man. Joseph de Acosta told of finding a buried giant on his farm in Mexico in 1586. He said not only were the bones enormous, but a tooth found was the size of a man's fist. I mean, I don't know about you, but a tooth the size of a man's fist. That sounds like sounds like bigger than 8-footer, right? More like a true Nephilim, 20-footer. So probably the most mysterious account of the ancient giants in Mexico came from explorer Paxton Haynes. He was exploring the Baranaca de Cobre area, Copper Canyon, in northern Mexico in the early 1930s. In a cave, he discovered the mummified bodies of 34 men and women, all measured between 7 and 8 foot tall, and all had blonde hair. Giants, blonde hair, angels, hybrids. So the conquistadors, without them, we wouldn't have any of this history. They found a lot of strange artifacts and different life forms with these giants. I mean, it's just crazy. And I mean, it's really fascinating to understand that these men were out there battling these tribes. So let's continue on with this history here on the giants and the conquistadors. Many ancient texts of the fabled giants are out there, and many of us heard of the folklore and tales from different parts of the world. The most renowned documents attesting to the mystic beings in the Bible that we mentioned, Goliath, Og, and the Nephilim. These giants were clearly not suffering from any disease, no pituitary gland abnormalities or some kind of growth spurt because something's going wrong. No, these were just big. They were healthy. They weren't walking with a cane. They weren't decrepit. So today, are there any giants living today? I don't know. I mean, if you talk to some of the Native Americans, they say some of them are in stasis. They're asleep, waiting for that appointed time to be reanimated. Some people supposedly claim to see giants or some really fuzzy, glitchy videos out there. I mean, take it for what it's worth. Are there giants out there? Possibly. So let's, so besides that, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're under the ground, maybe they're in stasis, maybe, I don't know. But when you dig deeper into it, there's a thing called the Codex Vatican, or Codex Rios. It's a manuscript which compiles translations from earlier texts written during the Spanish colonial era. It features an intriguing illustration of a group of Aztec warriors subduing a gigantic humanoid with its bowels on the outside. And there's you can search for it. It's the Aztecs are killing a Quasimitzin giant. They're pulling its guts out in this picture here, this drawing. And what Quasimitzin means, it means one of the old ones. So one of the ancients. And then by this sketch, it says this proves the Aztecs had defined notions of giants and could have even encountered them during their lives. In fact, the book Broken Spears, written and translated by Miguel Leon Portilla, speaks of such a confrontation. During the conquest between 1519 and 1521, the Conquistadors had reached the giant gates of the city, Tenochtitlan, and were about to plunder it. But an unexpected foe met them with huge boulders thrown from behind the fortification. A giant hero known as Tizcatzen was helping the Aztecs forces to drive back the Conquistadors. So there was a giant that was fighting the Conquistadors, and he was throwing boulders. And Tizcatzen, it's a tongue twister. That's the name of the giant. And around the city-state of Tenochtitlan, it fell in the end. The giant hero caused severe damages to the Spanish before his demise. So it sounds like one giant was causing a lot of damage. And it seems like he was by himself. But he was eventually, it's like he was killed. Because this giant was capable of throwing boulders from atop the walls. He outstrips the capacity of regular humans and can be considered indeed a giant, probably one of the old ones. Aztec mythology speaks of the Quasimetzin giants, the dominant race of the previous era. According to these beliefs, the Quasimetzin raised the ancient citadel of Tenochtitlan, or Tianacuan, place where men become gods, and the Great Pyramid of Cholula. Mythology reminds of 10 Quasimetzin who allegedly made contact with the Mesoamericans and helped them erect some of their imposing structures. This would explain a lot, right? The megaliths. So today, a lot of people, or a lot of archaeologists and what have you, are still mythified by who or what could have built these megaliths. This goes back to, for me, this goes back to the seven sages, and this goes back to the Veracochas out in that part, the Quetzalcoatls. So let's continue with this. The giants of Peru. Stories about the Peruvian giants have been known since the 16th century, when the first Spanish conquistadors reached this region. One of the earliest reports of the Peruvian giants is a story of the conquistador, Pedro Cíes de León, described in the folio World Inca Commentaries, Volume 1. This man apparently did not see the giants with his own eyes, but he talked with those who saw them. In his report, he described that once people of great growth sailed on their large rafts from reeds to the shore where the village of the local Indians stood. The village was located on the peninsula of Santa Elena, which is now the territory of Ecuador. The giants therefore landed with their rafts on the peninsula and set up the camp near the conquistadors. They apparently decided to settle here for a long time because immediately they began to dig deep wells in order to extract water from them. Giants knew what's up, right? Looking for water. They knew exactly what they were doing. Some of them were so tall that a man of ordinary size would barely reach their knees. Their limbs were proportional to the body, but their huge heads with hair to their shoulders were monstrous. Their eyes were huge like plates, and their faces had no beards. Some of them were dressed in animal skins, but some were in their natural state without clothes. Not a single woman was visible among them. When they set up camp, they began to dig deep wells for water. They dug them in the stony soil, and they built strong stone wells. The water in them was excellent, always cool and tasted good. So these giants were, they were born through rock. And doesn't mention any tools they used or... See, that's one thing I always wondered. What type of artifacts were left behind or were discovered that were confiscated? The technology that these things used. Were they just big picks or some type of shovels? I don't know. But it would be nice to see what they used. As soon as the giants set up their camp, they immediately made a bloodthirsty raid on the village of local Indians. According to the description of De Leon, they robbed everything they could grab and ate everything they could eat, including people. So these giants were, once again, they were cannibals. They didn't care what they ate as long as they ate, and that included people. It was a terrible sight when these huge people hung over the trees and the Indians fleeing from them, who practically could not defend themselves from them. Then, on the site of the devastated village, the giants built their huge huts and stayed here to fish and hunt in the local forest. This story ended with a completely surreal story. When a shining angel appeared in the sky and drove all the giants away. So there was an angel that came, and came and took care of these giants. And that goes back to when the giants first saw the conquistadors, or when they saw Magellan, they thought they were gods. Because it's my contention that these giants were seeing these angels, that they were coming to them for whatever reason that is. I don't know. But it's good to tie these dots together when you get this information. Now, what if the Native Americans? Because right after the conquistadors, and there's definitely more on the conquistadors. I just want to cover a little bit of what the Native Americans thought, because this was just like right after them or simultaneously. But let's segue really quick to another one real quick for the conquistadors before I get into that. The Solomon Islands is a sovereign state of Oceania to the east of Papua New Guinea, which was discovered by the Spanish navigator Alvaro de Medina in 1568, and named them Islas Solomon. The Solomon Islands are actually a group of various islands, consisting of 6 major islands over 900 smaller islands. During World War II, there was also a war that occurred between the American and Japanese forces on its largest island, Guadalcanal, known as the Battle of Guadalcanal. There's also dense rainforest on this island, which is hiding its secrets inside. It is believed the giants still exist here, such as a race whose length is up to 15 feet, and their stories have been found since the ancient times. People residing on the island have always claimed to have seen these giants. But apart from these, there have been so much encounters with giants of people from outside, which would not be right to leave it as a fantasy. During World War II, when the Japanese soldiers and Americans fought here, the Japanese soldiers themselves claimed to have encountered giants here. They opened fire on the giants, but the bullets had no effect on them. After this, the giants, filled with wrath, and attacked the soldiers with trees. Locals told that the giants had also kidnapped a woman named Mango and imprisoned her for 25 years. So the giants kidnapped a woman. The locals believed that she was dead, but years later she escaped from their captivity and returned with her surprising story. During that time, she was pregnant and later gave birth to a child. But when the child turned 5 years old, Mango's brother slaughtered him and buried him there. His grave still exists on the island. Searching for something in these dense forests is quite difficult. But the locals claim that the giants have built an underground cavern system beneath the entire island within which they live. The way to this underground world is hidden somewhere in the forest, as most of the time they stay inside, but from time to time these giants and the Solomons can be seen. I mean, I've heard stories of the Solomon Islands, and that's a really deep mystery there. That's one of those places where you can scratch it like, yeah, maybe there are giants still there, you know? Let's go to the Native Americans now, real quick. It has importance with the conquistadors, the biblical giants, and the whole part of the history of it. The Cherokee called them the Moon People. The Utes and the Paiutes spoke of a hideous race of cannibals, 10 feet tall, living in caves. And the Choctaw also have an account of the race of giants that first colonized the Ohio Valley. From Old World Roots of the Cherokee, Chapter 5, America's Middle Ages. Pages 78 and 79 we read. What kind of Indians lived in the territory? The Choctaw and the Chickasaw carved out for their new home. According to the traditions, reports Cushman, as confirmed by excavations of bones in Tennessee, it was a race of white giants. The tradition of the Choctaws told of a race of giants that were inhabited the now state of Tennessee, and with whom their ancestors fought when they arrived in Mississippi in their migration from the west. Doubtless, Old Mexico. There, the tradition states that Nahulu, race of giants, literally wizards, was of wonderful stature, but as the traditions of the mastodon, which was used to be found on the Great Plains. So this also considered to be a foolish fable, the creature of the wild imagination. They exhumed bones again to prove the truth of the Choctaws tradition. The giants had been Rafikuit's Atlans. Cushman then recounts the discovery in 1880 at a burial mound near Plano, Texas, of human bones of enormous size. The femoral bones being 5 inches longer than the ordinary length, and the jaw bones so large as to slip over the face of a man's with ease. Cushman goes on to identify them as with older occupants in North America, um, the Telegans. Many historians, moreover, speculate they were builders of the Adena Mounds. As for the Chickasaw, Cushman notes that they have no record of their history before the colonial period, although it is assuredly the same as the Choctaws, being one tribe people until the division made by the two chiefs, Chickasaw and Chibata, many years after the arrival and the location of the Mississippi River. Of the Natchez, Cushman records that they, if tradition may be believed, also came from Mexico, where they had lived for centuries. Now, a story told by the Comanches in 1857. Innumerable moons ago, a race of white men, 10 feet high, and far more rich and powerful than white people now living, here inhabited a large range of country extending from the rising to the setting sun. Their fortifications crowned the summits of the mountains, protecting the populous cities situated in the intervening valleys. They excelled every other nation which was flourished, even before or since. In all manner of cunning handcraft, were brave and warlike. Ruling over land, they were wrestled from its ancient possessors with a high and haughty hand. Compared with them, the pale faces of the present day were pygmies in both art and arms. They drove the Indians from their homes, putting them to the sword, and occupying the valleys in which their fathers had dwelt before them since the world began. At length, in the height of their power and glory, they were remembered justice and mercy no more, and because proud and lifted up, the Great Spirit descended from above, sweeping them with fire and deluge from the face of the earth. The mounds and the speaker, Chief Rolling Thunder, and his Spanish listener, had seen on the tablelands were the remnants of fortresses and the crumbling ruins that surrounded us, all that remained of a mighty city. The word Nahulu or Naholo is now emphatically applied to the white race and no other. The Nahulu were white complexion, according to the Choctaw tradition, and were still an existing people at the time of the advent of the Choctaws of the Mississippi, concludes Cushman. In agreement, the Indian trader Adair often refers to the Nana-ish Tahulu as departed white ghosts vested with spiritual powers, whose descendants were priests and magicians. Their cries and magic spells could still be heard in the mounds of those Okumigli, as you pronounce that. These references contribute to the suspicion that the Indians who precede Aztec tribes from Mexico were and would say today Caucasian. About exactly a year ago, there are other mentions of other researchers looked into this. A really good one is Fritz Zimmerman. And we go into the Navajo. The Navajo legends, they speak of the Star Snake people, a regal race of white giants endowed with mining technology who dominated the West, enslaved lesser tribes, and had strongholds all through the Americas. They were either extinguished or went back to the heavens. Very interesting, right? back to the heavens. The name may be a corruption of the biblical race known as the Anakim. Maybe. Regarding the mounds, many of the mound sites uncovered in the 19th century tell of a story of constant warfare by incoming Asiatic tribes against the giants occupying the land. One grisly scene showed thousands of skeletons, male and female, and young, heaped in mass graves, with warrior skulls pierced by arrows. It would appear that the aboriginal inhabitants of the Ohio Valley were gradually displaced. Some of the members of their society went over into the ranks of the new conquerors, bequeathing a strain of great stature still noticeable. For instance, the Mobilian chief Tuscaloosa and DeSoto's Indian queen, both of whom were said to have been over 7 foot tall. Now, when you look at this, let's get let's kind of look at their history, at their background. They had a mother goddess religion. They used copper, not bronze, for axes. Polished slate tools, including fishing plummets, which are apparently regarded as sacred. Their belief that the grandmother moon was a repository of souls. Their diet emphasizing shellfish, for which the double row of teeth probably was selected as an evolutionary advantage in their beachcomber origin out of Africa. Right? Possibly, right? Double row of teeth for cracking open seashells and eating them. They are known to build fish weirs in North America, rivers and traps. Now, me myself, I've come across these fish weirs. They're on shorelines. They're circle encasings with boulders, and they contributed that to the Native Americans. Well, how do we know the Native Americans didn't repurpose that from the giant tribes? We don't. They had certain vegetarian habits, like wild rice, for instance. Their artifacts were pipes often buried with the dead. They had the use of coal and petroleum, weaving and looms, knowledge of seafaring, mathematics, engineering, including canals and irrigation. They would bury dogs with a child to guard the latter in the afterlife. A language apparently to the Afro-Asiatic and close to Semitic tongues. The king crafts, nobles were buried in seated positions on thrones surrounded by a courtier of retainers. How many of you seen that or heard that the giants are found standing up like on crowns or like on chairs? These were the kings. These are the giants. And I mean, there's so much out there that we can keep going on here. The double row of teeth is not mentioned in the Bible. Doesn't mean that they didn't exist. And when I was doing some research on this, there's some researchers that went through these things about the double row of teeth, and obviously there were giants found. And when they imply here that those double row of teeth were used for seashells, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, to break these shells open, you would need a strong jaw and strong teeth to do that. It's like cracking a nut. I mean, how would you do that? I mean, you need a nutcracker, right? So I think that's and we have more. Let's do just one more here. We're going to do this last one on the Conquistadors. The memoirs of Conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo. And it's talking about Cortez. That one day he took the Caciques aside and put several questions to them respecting the situation and affairs of Mexico. Zicotentacal, as more intelligent and distinguished personage, answered his queries, and the Maxicatzin, who were likewise a man of high rank, assisted him from time to time. Our friends told us how how and whence they came into this country, and how they had settled themselves here. How it came that, notwithstanding their vicinity to the Mexicans, they resembled each other so little and lived in perpetual warfare with each other. The tradition was also handed down from their forefathers that in the ancient times there lived here a race of men and women who were immense stature and heavy bones, and were very bad and evil disposed people, whom they had for the greater part exterminated by continual war, and the few that were left gradually died away. In order to give us a notion of the huge frame of this people, they dragged forth a bone, rather a thigh bone, one of the giants, which was very strong and measured the length of a man of a good stature. The bone was still entire from the knee to the hip joint. I measured it by my own person and found it to be of my length, although I am a man of considerable height. They showed us many similar pieces of bones, but they were all decayed and eaten away. Cortez observed that we ought to forward these bones to the Majesty in Spain by the first opportunity. So we did. And this news reached Spain. So when you look at all these stories of the giants and the conquistadors, we talked about the King James Bible, about the Nephilim. The anthropologists have found evidence of human giants existing in the far distant past. They can conjecture millions of years or whatever they want to do, but there are giants. The Gold Museum of Peru has displays of giant skulls and mummies who were evidently royalty, according to the clothing, artifacts they had with them. And in Glenn Kimball's experience with the giants, Glenn photographed the mummies of two giant men in Lima, Peru in 1969. These giants are still in Gold Museum in Lima, Peru today, and can be seen by anyone who visits. They were mummified because their golden robes are prominently on display. Their crowns could fit around Glenn's waist. Their golden gloves have fingers 10 inches long. Their mummies can be measured with a tape, and they were both around 9.5 feet tall. There were other personal items fit for a giant king that wouldn't have been useful to a man of normal size. The actual bodies are encased in glass for all to see. The news media never photographed anyone 9.5 feet tall. This isn't the only time where mentioned by the prominent people visited South America. Leon Ciez de Leon and Agustin de Zarate published texts on South American giants in 1553 AD and 1555, respectively. These books came just after the arrival of the Conquistadors and were published within 20 years of Pizarro. They said that the native traditions told the incoming Spanish that the giants came to the Americas on raft-like boats. Some of these men were so tall that from the knee down they were as big as a man. Their eyes, once again, were huge. So we see that these giants were seen by many Spanish explorers. So Ciez de Leon also said that when Don Antonio de Mendoza went to Cusco, Peru, in 1560, that he found tombs with extremely large bones, similar to the ones already found in Mexico City at the time of Montezuma. Padre Acosta found similar large bones in 1560 in Manta, Peru. Well, they later found similar bones in 1928 when constructing the railroad up to Ecuador. They were hidden behind stalagmites in caves. When Diego de Ordaz, one of the conquistadors with Cortez, climbed to the high volcano of Popocatépetl, I think that's what you pronounce it, near Mexico City, according to Las Casas, he found a giant thigh bone that he sent to the Vatican. When Cortez invaded Mexico, his men found living giants in the region and reported them. In their written testimony, they tore a few ribs from the dead bodies of these giants and brought them back to Spain with them. In the summer of 1931, Monsignor F. Lundau organized an expedition to the jungles of San Agustin. He found traces of very ancient South American empire, known as the Old British Buccaneers of the 17th century. These men were giants who had knowledge of electricity, which they used in various forms. The giants are no dummies, man. They're using electricity. The race of ancient white giant men with the herds was called the Viracochas. Pedro Cires de Leon said that they came long before the Incas began to reign. The Indians also called these white men Titicaca, like Lake Titicaca today, located in the mountains between Bolivia and Peru. Glenn lived in Julca, Peru, on the shores of Lake Titicaca, very close to the ancient city of Tinacuan, where there are huge statues to the giants with 6 fingers. 6 fingers and toes to this day. On the door to the sun, the main entrance to the temple is carved by the image of Viracocha, the creator of not only their civilization, but the white-bearded god who created the whole world. This temple has many similarities to the Masonic temples of our day. The North American Indians believe that the first race of human beings were giants. In the autobiography of William Buffalo Bill Cody, Cody writes while camping on the South Platte, a Pawnee Indian came into the camp with what the army surgeon pronounced to be a giant thigh bone of a human being. When Cody asked about where such a bone might have come from, the Indian replied that long ago, the race of men had been 3 times larger than normal men and able to outrun the buffalo and even carry it in one hand. The bones that were in the possession of Buffalo Bill were given to the museum that promptly hid them. They continue to be lost to today, though many saw them at that time. The Brazilian giants. William Turner, the naturalist and Dean of Wells, circa 1568, during the time of the Conquistadors, mentions at the coast of Brazil, near the river of Polota, he saw a tribe of very gigantic naked savages, one of whom he estimated to be 12 feet tall. While in Brazil, Kinvet several times saw an Indian who, still a youth, towered to a height of 13 spans. Since 13 spans equals 9 feet, 9 inches, this would have made the giant the size of Goliath. Chile's giants. De Lujan reported contact with the natives of Chile, that they were enormous bulk and stature. Frazier also relates that the natives of the coast of Chile told him that some sort of Indians living inland stood 9 feet. Captain George Shevlock of the voyage in 1719 to the island of Chiloe off the coast of Chile saw Indians which stood 9 to 10 feet high. And we know about Magellan and Amerigo Vespucci and what they found, but we'll just glance over it really quick. Antonio Pigafetta, he was a chronicler of Magellan's circumnavigation of the world, and they came upon some giant tribes. But 20 years before Magellan came, Amerigo Vespucci and some of his fellow sailors sighted several giants off the coast of Venezuela. Amerigo, from whom approximately 1/3 of the world was later named, recounted the experience. And he talks about it. And it's really quick. Thus, sailing along, we came upon the island Curaçao, which was situated 15 leagues from the mainland. At our arrival, since we saw no people on the land look favorable to us, we decided to explore it, and 11 of us landed. We discovered the trail and set ourselves to walk up 2.5 leagues into the island. We met with the village of 12 houses, which did not find anyone except 7 women. And they were of such great stature that was not of one of them who was not taller than every one of us by a span and a half, 19 inches. So all these accounts regarding giant women, giants in that region of the world where Magellan was, and later Drake, the British sailors. But there's a lot of history with the giants, with the Bible, the Conquistadors, the Native Americans. It's just, you can keep going on and on in this. But I want to thank you all for inviting us into your room, into your car, into your bedroom, into the gym, wherever you're at, your personal private space. I hope you enjoyed it.